So, Moana 2, which is out now, has broken all kinds of box office records. We talked about the movie itself last week. Now I want us to make room for a perspective you don't hear very often. Today on the show, a critique of Disney's approach to telling a story like Moana. I'm Alamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Look, honestly, the Moana sequel has been a gigantic hit. It has made almost $400 million since it opened last week. So we know a lot of you have seen it. Now, listen, I don't know if you caught our review of Moana 2 last week, but one of the people in the group chat, Riley Esno, had this to say about how the first movie landed for her as an Anishinaabe teenager growing up in Thunder Bay.
One of the things that always frustrated me about Disney is that for the longest time, the narratives that they reserved for their Black and brown characters were always tradition versus authenticity.
Yeah.
That they were like, I don't want to be, the chief's daughter anymore. I want to go off with this white man. And that's me, Dad, was kind of like what their narrative was. And what made Moana, I think, impactful to me at the start was because she actually finds her power in that movie through the tradition of her people, through listening to her elders and her grandmother, and that's her authenticity. And it was for that purpose, I think a really empowering thing for me. I do wish, though, that they had obviously done, especially leading up to Moana 2, better community engagement with this, because from what I've heard, they've done that also previously. I know a lot of folks, I'm sure this isn't a unanimous opinion, but that with Frozen 2, that a lot of Sami folks were very pleased with
the representation.
All of the details. Yeah, totally. So there's a precedent there, and there's obviously a model that they've done before. But if Pacific Islanders are well, you didn't do it here, then what the heck, Disney,
First of all, I just want to acknowledge the idea of what the heck, Disney. That is not a new question. That is a question that gets asked every so often. Right now, we are going to have that what the heck, Disney conversation. And Keala Kelly is an Indigenous Hawaiian journalist, podcaster, and filmmaker. She spoke up when the first Moana was released back in 2016. She's actually decided not to see the sequel. And she's with us now to talk about that decision and why, from her perspective, there's just so much wrong with Moana. Keala, welcome to the show.
Hey, aloha alamin. Mahalo for having me on.
Hey, I'm grateful that you're here. Can I just start with the original? When you think back to the first Moana movie, where did Moana go wrong for you?
Well, I don't think it should have ever been made, so it went wrong at its inception. I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for, or the answer
all
that
answers welcome, but tell me more. Tell me more.
Well, it always depends on where one enters a story, right? If you're going to enter the story of the Pacific through the lens of a Disney cartoon, probably nothing I say is going to make any sense. But, in order for that story to exist, heaps and heaps and tons of culture theft and exploitation had to go on to create that monstrosity that little kids think is some kind of, true, or kind of entertaining way to have a new Disney princess, even though we know Moana's not officially a princess, but she's basically another Disney princess. So, it's the exploitation that it's just a colonial project. It's just another way to colonize already severely colonized peoples. The Pacific is huge. It's the largest ocean on Earth. We call it Moana, actually. That's our word for the Pacific. Disney's even trademarked our word. So everything Disney does is for exploitation. It's an extraction project. It's like mining, and it's for profit. So, children don't know that when they see a film like that. And most people don't really care about the Pacific. So we're completely decontextualized in order for people to have that experience. You asked me where it went wrong. For me, it went wrong, just the idea of it.
Listen, you've said a lot there that I want to spend time unpacking. The idea of Disney sort of engaging in a largely extractive project. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in that thesis. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But if we can just ground us maybe in the story of the first Moana. You've described it as your region's cultural heist of the century. And that has to do with some of the ways that the sacred knowledge about wayfinding, which is very central to the plot of the movie, how that knowledge, that sacred knowledge was obtained. Do you want to tell that story? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
First of all, I should start here. I think it was Taika Waititi who wrote the original screenplay for Disney. Now, he's a famous Maori filmmaker. He's an Academy Award-winning filmmaker and actor. He's super talented. So we have this Maori guy who started with that. And then when it came to cultural knowledge or sacred knowledge of navigating and wayfinding, instead of going to the people that this knowledge really actually came from, they went to Nainoa Thompson, who's a Hawaiian navigator who's famous because back in the 70s, he navigated the hokulea, which is the kind of canoe that you see depicted in Moana, the double hull outrigger canoe. He navigated it to Tahiti using this knowledge. But for hundreds of years before then, the Hawaiian people, we hadn't been doing that kind of navigating, so that practice had been lost, let's say, right? Or not continued. In order to do what Nainoa did and what Hawaiians have been doing since with the hokulea and other projects, they went to Mau Piala, and he's referred to as Papa Mau. And he lived in Micronesia. He lived on an island called, I hope I'm saying this right, it's Satawal, one of the Carolinian islands out there in Micronesia. There's all these countries out in the Pacific. You know, most people don't realize that. There's hundreds of languages and cultures. And so the Federated States of Micronesia, he lived in one of them called Yap. Okay. And I don't even know if there's a couple hundred people even living on that island. That's how remote it is, right? So they found the one man who still had this knowledge, this sacred, ancient knowledge that's thousands of years old. And he taught it to Nainoa so that the Hawaiian people could have this renewal, this cultural renewal. He did not give it to Nainoa so that he could profit Disney for billions and billions of dollars. So right from the jump, it was wrong that Nainoa Thompson, this Hawaiian, gave Disney this ancient knowledge to turn into a cartoon to then exploit. In addition to that, Maui, who's a really sacred figure to many Pacific peoples, in Polynesia specifically, you know, they turned him into a clown, a buffoon. He's not that to us. And that's another sacred thing that they desecrated, okay, for profit. So it makes me sad. I mean, I understand, like Riley, listening to her, and I did listen to that whole show. And I appreciate where she's coming from. I appreciate where any Native person is coming from. But the fact is, it actually invisibilizes us, what Disney does. It doesn't make us visible. It makes our truth invisible, more invisible than it already is.
Okay, so you've given me a lot there, and I want to just sort of just take a moment to contextualize some of what you're saying. So Nainoa was one of the consultants that Disney used in the construction of Moana, the first movie, which I guess that leads into the construction of the entire franchise. And the knowledge that he got when visiting that elder was not shared with him specifically for the intention of go create a Disney movie. It was so that the knowledge can sort of maybe continue to exist. I think that's useful context to start, but also the thing that you just said there is important to zero in on, because what Riley was talking about on her show is, as an Indigenous person, she'd not grown up with Disney characters who are willing and who are able to sort of refer to their ancestors and refer to their traditions in order to strengthen them. I want to maybe play you a clip of Olii Carvalho, who's the actor who plays Moana. She's kind of talked about her own Native Hawaiian ancestry, and I just want to play you this clip of her talking about this question of authentic representation in this interview.
It's also so very important to me that the representation in this film carries as far as it does. I'm someone from Hawaii, but our cast also includes people from Aotearoa, New Zealand, from Samoa, from Tahiti, and that feeling of Pacific pride is so important and so potent, as well as the story of navigating and wayfinding. This is an ancient knowledge that the people of the Pacific have. Sharing that with a broader audience, I think, is the best thing that I could have possibly asked for.
First of all, please excuse that cheesy background music. We did not put that in there. I think there's a couple of ideas being set against each other here, Keala, which is this idea of Moana's useful for telling a different kind of story about an Indigenous people who don't often get those stories told. And then the thing that you're saying, which is actually saying you didn't go about it in the right way. So what do you make of what Olii was saying there?
Well, I mean, that's absurd to me. that she even uses the word representation. First of all, Polynesians should not be exploiting Micronesian cultural knowledge. So there's that, okay? That's a huge problem with this franchise. And you got a bunch of Samoans walking around deciding to remake things, right? Oh, we'll take a little bit of Hawaiian this, a little bit of Maori that, a little bit of Micronesian. It's not theirs to do that with, okay? So from the beginning, it's not okay. And the way she's framing what she's saying, I understand, it's her job, okay? Yeah. She's doing this for pay, for profit. But this is not helping our people, this so-called sharing of like this kind of culture vomit put together of all these different Oceania peoples. That's not helping Hawaiians. We are, I'm going to circle back to that first clip that you played where you mentioned the Sami and Frozen. Disney had to, after the first Frozen, they had to, when they went back to, stink their fangs back in for some more, they had to make what basically amounted to a treaty with the Sami. Well, the Sami people throughout the region of, the frozen north where they live, it's not like Polynesia and Micronesia and Melanesia. It's not like the Pacific where there's hundreds and hundreds of us or of our different nations and cultures. I mean, Australia is part of the Pacific and there's like 500 nations right there.
Right.
So this is a complex situation here. And our colonial, in the context of what white people have done in the Pacific, the colonization of the Pacific is so horrible what's been done here. And so you see like this story of Moana looking cute and being heroic, and this is like feeding this American fantasy of Polynesia and the Pacific, when in reality, the only treaties the Hawaiian people had with the United States were treaties of trade, commerce, and banking. We're a nation state. The Hawaiian Kingdom is a nation state that's been illegally taken over by the United States. Nobody talks about that, Alameen. Nobody cares about that. You see, that's our reality. That's our truth. And what they've done, what the U.S. has done in Micronesia, again, what did they do down there? They so-called tested nuclear bombs. That's like acts of war on these native peoples that nobody cared about. So these kind of narratives that get constructed by Disney, which is just practically a nation state itself, it's like the most powerful media arm of the American narrative, right? So it creates these fantasies that completely obliterate our reality. So when Ali says that she's representing or it's representing, I don't know what she's referring to because that is so removed from the truth of us that she shouldn't use the word. And it also makes me sad because I know she's a young Hawaiian woman. She was a teenager when she was in the first one. So here I am sounding like the pissed off auntie who's saying, hey, this isn't okay. And I sound like the angry lady that's trying to take away some little princess story. In fact, it's a predatory thing what Disney's doing to these children, because this whole project, by the way, especially Moana 2, it's about merchandising. And even the reviews I've seen for Moana 2 are like, gosh, this is just like a commercial. Even when Indian Country Today, which actually a number of us had published about the first Moana in that publication 8 years ago, even what they published about Moana 2 is like a commercial. This is about merchandising and selling product, most of it plastic, to children and exploiting us in order to get to it. So I know that you're asking me questions in a way that we're almost talking about culture, but we have to talk about the culture of the thief, as we do that, because we're the victims of it. We're not the doers of it. So they can brown face it all they like. That doesn't change what it is.
I mean, when you say brown face it, like, look, one of the realities.
Dwayne Johnson.
Well, and also one of the realities of this movie, one of the realities of Moana 2 is that like 2 of the 3 co-directors are Samoan, David Derrick Jr. and Daniladu Miller, who also co-wrote the story. I think that there's something to be said about, if Disney's interested, say, in remedying some of the representation problems that it has had over the past, several decades. Presumably, it would start at a place of saying, okay, how can we be more consultative? How can we be more open to our stories changing? And I think what I'm hearing you say is actually like, not only did you not do enough, but the thing that you're doing is actively more harmful, or harmful in an entirely different kind of way. Like, is any part of you kind of curious what they might have done with 2 of the 3 co-directors being Samoan, how this sequel might treat the story differently? Or is that actually just kind of like so foundationally flawed that you're kind of out on the whole project?
Well, I'm going to go back to the roots of it. You know, why I'm not sure why people think that if you plant a poisonous tree, it's going to give you something other than poison fruit, right? Like, there's not a nice way to rape a culture. I mean, you can kind of smile about it and get some other people to help you with it, but it still is what it is, right? It doesn't change, you know, the goal of it. It doesn't change the motivation for it. You know, it's an extractive mining project. Film in this way is like tourism. It's extraction. And by the way, Disney also has a massive tourism project in Hawaii called the Aulani Hotel. It's destroyed its whole section of the coast where it parked itself, and people fly in to basically culture rape us there. So just because they can get some Hawaiians to work at the hotel and dance for them does not legitimize what it is. It just covers up what it is and makes it seem like you've got some people consenting. They don't represent us, and they certainly don't represent our histories, and they certainly don't represent whatever's sacred about our ancient knowledge. It's a desecration project from front to back. So, you know, it's the magical world of Disney. They're going to cast a spell, and they're going to sell some toys that are probably going to end up in the Pacific plastic, you know, garbage patch that's the size of Texas. So, you know, the tragic ironies about this project just mount. They don't go away. So just because they can get somebody who's of Samoan ancestry to go and do it to me, I'm a Hawaiian person, and I'm telling you, they're doing it to me. They're doing it to my people. They're doing it to other Pacific peoples. They're doing it to children who aren't born yet. These things matter. Now, they're obliterating us in order to entertain people, but as the people who are being obliterated, I don't agree just because they found some natives to go along with it. That doesn't make it okay. So that's why I call it brown facing, because these guys know they're just doing it for their personal profit. They're not doing it because they care about us. They don't care that, you know, Hawaiians have the largest rates of homelessness and suicide and incarceration. They don't give a damn about us. So I'm not going to address it as if they do. They've completely obliterated us so that they can make money. They're not trying to help anybody. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm just like going off the rails.
No, that's not only is that okay, I welcome it, because I think that's a perspective that I don't think we hear about nearly enough. And I think what you've done is you've connected a movie to a larger cultural project.
You know, for me as a Hawaiian person, as an activist, as a thinking person, I just, you know, I look at our actual history, I look at our actual condition, and I put Disney in the context of that. And there's nothing good that happens for Hawaiians. I've known Hawaiians who've worked at that hotel. So it's like I have friends who've worked there to make money, right? So they can pay their rent. That's the highest rent in America. But you know, the destruction of us is this ongoing project, and Disney is just one of the tools of that destruction. So I don't have any, you know, I can't say anything nice about it, except that I hope people will think twice about exposing their children to this kind of entertainment that's really only constructed and manufactured to get those kids to get their parents to spend $450 on the entire Moana collection of toys. You know, it's not, you know, that somebody like Riley as a kid, or any child. I mean, I remember watching stuff when I was a kid. It's magical. Movies are magical. It puts you in a spell. But, you know, there was a time when The Song of the South was a really magical movie. And Uncle Remus was singing about, you know, Mr. Bluebird on his shoulder, right? And there was a time where people thought that was okay. Now, you know, they'd be ashamed to show that movie. And someday Moana is going to line up like that, unless we're completely gone by then and, you know, to erase us completely, just completely silence us and erase us and absorb us.
The thing you just said is a thing I think about just personally all the time, just in terms of like the content that I have a 7-year-old kid. And I think all the time about, in 50 years, what are going to be the things that she watches now that are going to have a warning in front of them saying, we don't think like this anymore. And I say this because I grew up watching Aladdin, and that has a warning in front of it, you know, and I grew up watching Dumbo, and that now has a warning in front of it. And I'm not naive enough to think that nothing being made now is not going to have a warning in front of it in 40 or 50 years. Like, something's going to change. We're going to come to certain realizations about the stuff that we're making now, and we're going to say, oh, no, that was exactly the wrong way to go about it. I think you've already given us a lot to think about. But also, if there's one thing that you'd like people to keep in mind as they're watching this movie, as millions and millions of people already have, what would you like them to hold on to?
Well, I would like them not to watch it. So that's what I would like to stop them from watching it in the first place. I would like them, however, if they do subject themselves and their children to this kind of narrative, I would like them to take responsibility for the fact that, when they buy that plastic popcorn bucket, they're profiting an enterprise that doesn't give a damn about the cultures that it has exploited to give them that 90 minutes or 120 minutes of entertainment. I'd like them to have to own up to that. Whatever form that would take. See, I want to break the spell before they're under the spell and say, listen, you're going to go ahead and do this, but you're just part of an exploitation project. You're just sucking our spiritual mana from us so that you can have entertainment for a couple of hours. And that plastic thing that you just paid $10 for is going to end up poisoning our ocean. So own it.
Oof. Keala, that is a lot to sit with. I'm going to go sit with that. And also, I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
Mahalo nui, Alameen, for having me on the show, and ahui ho, malama pono, we say. Maybe we'll meet again.
And Keala Kelly is an Indigenous Hawaiian journalist, podcaster, and filmmaker. That is it for the show today. My name is Alameen Abdul Mahmood. This show is called Commotion. Listen, we are going to be here tomorrow. If you're going to be here, we would love to see you there.